The universe operates on principles we understand: physics, chemistry, the fundamental laws of cause and effect. But what happens when something defies every sensor, every theory, every rational explanation? On a cold October evening, the sky above the Black Lake answered that question with fire. It began 11 light-years away and 400 years in the making, though no one at Hogwarts would ever know the full shape of it. A Starfleet prototype transporter. Designed to punch matter across distances no conventional beam could reach, had been caught in the crossfire of a three-way skirmish between the Federation, the Klingon Empire, and the Romulan Star Empire. All three wanted the technology. None of them would get it intact. When a disruptor bolt clipped the housing mid-transport, the resulting cascade didn't just fail. It tore. Captain Jean-Luc Picard felt the deck of the shuttle shudder beneath him, watched the containment field flicker gold and violet across Data's console, and had exactly 1.5 seconds to brace before the world dissolved into light. He landed on wet grass. Not the transporter pad. Not the shuttle bay. Grass, soaked with autumn rain, sloping down toward black water that reflected a sky utterly unlike anything a stellar cartography database had ever catalogued. Too many stars, wrong constellations, and looming above it all, impossibly, a castle with towers that seemed to have been built by architects who had never once considered structural symmetry a virtue. Riker was 10 meters to his left, already on one knee, phaser drawn. Worf stood near the tree line, his posture rigid, scanning for threats with the particular stillness of a warrior who has just realized he does not know where the enemy is. Data was already on his feet, tricorder raised, his head tilted at the exact angle he adopted when a problem delighted him. "Captain," Data said, "my readings are inconsistent." "Define inconsistent, Mr. Data." The tricorder is registering biological signatures with no corresponding technological signatures, energy discharges with no identifiable power source, and structural readings suggesting this castle has been continuously renovated for approximately 1,000 years using construction methods that should be physically impossible. Picard exhaled. Whatever had happened during that transport, they were no longer in the quadrant they'd left. He had faced the Borg, negotiated with the Cardassians, been assimilated and returned. He had learned, through hard experience, that the correct first response to the impossible was not panic. It was observation. That discipline was tested within the minute, because they were not alone in that field. Roughly 200 meters east, a Klingon bird of prey crew, flung through the same rupture during the same battle, had already drawn their weapons and were arguing loudly about whether the castle represented an opportunity for conquest or an insult to be avenged for the indignity of the crash. And somewhere in the shadow of the greenhouses, unseen by either group, a lone Romulan operative crouched low, already calculating how three-stranded factions and one very strange, very old fortress might be turned to the Empire's advantage. None of them noticed the boy watching from the castle's western tower until the alarm bells began to ring. Albus Dumbledore reached the grounds first, his wand already lit, his half-moon spectacles reflecting the strange blue shimmer still fading from the air where the rupture had torn the sky. He took in the scene with the unhurried thoroughness of a man who had, over a very long life, learned that the worst mistakes were made in haste. For strangers in unfamiliar uniforms. No visible means of transport, no broom, no floor residue, no apparition crack. And an energy signature his wand had never registered before, not once in 115 years of magical study. "Good evening," Dumbledore said, in the mild tone of a man greeting unexpected guests at a garden party. "I don't suppose any of you would care to explain how you came to be standing on my lawn?" Picard lowered his phaser, not fully, but enough to signal intent. "I wish I could, sir. We were engaged in what I can only describe as an accident of transport technology. We did not intend to arrive here, wherever here is, and we have no wish to cause you or your institution any harm." Dumbledore's eyes moved from Picard to Worf's ridged forehead, to Data's yellow-tinted eyes, to Riker's still-raised weapon, and something in his expression sharpened with interest rather than alarm. "Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry," he said. And you are, I take it, not wizards. No, Picard said carefully. We are explorers. From a very long way from here. Behind Dumbledore, running figures were now visible on the castle steps. Professors, wands drawn, and among them a boy with untidy black hair and a scar on his forehead, straining against a teacher's arm to see what had fallen from the sky. Data's head turned sharply toward the castle. Captain, I am detecting 3 additional energy clusters approaching from the northeast, southeast, and the dungeons respectively. Based on the disruptor signature I am also reading nearby, I believe the Klingon and Romulan elements of the conflict were transported here as well. Picard closed his eyes for half a second. Whatever this place was, they had not arrived alone, and the war that had scattered them here had not ended. It had simply changed battlefields. Mr. Worf, he said quietly, I believe we're about to have company. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Trek universe, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. Live long and prosper. Dumbledore raised a hand, and the professors converging across the ground slowed, though their wands did not lower. Picard recognized the gesture for what it was, a leader asking his people to hold position while he assessed a situation himself. It was not so different from what he would have asked of his own crew. Minerva, Dumbledore said without turning, if you would keep the students at a distance, I think that would be wise. A stern-faced witch in tartan robes nodded once and moved to intercept the crowd gathering on the steps, though Picard noted she did not stop looking over her shoulder. Neither did the boy with the scar, who had gone very still, watching the 4 strangers with the particular intensity of someone cataloging details for later. Professor Dumbledore, Picard said, choosing the title deliberately. It was clear this was a place of learning, and rank mattered here as much as it did aboard any starship. I am Captain Jean-Luc Picard. This is Commander Riker, Lieutenant Worf, and Lieutenant Commander Data. We represent the United Federation of Planets. I give you my word we mean no harm to you or your students. A federation, Dumbledore repeated, testing the word. Of planets. That is a rather larger claim than most visitors make when they land on my lawn, Captain. It's an honest one. Data, who had been running his tricorder in a slow arc since the moment he'd risen from the grass, made a small sound of what might have been surprise, had he been capable of feeling it. Captain, I believe I should report an anomaly. Go ahead, Mr. Data. The individual identifying himself as Professor Dumbledore is currently producing a localized distortion in the electromagnetic spectrum consistent with no known energy discharge in Federation records. The light emitted from the tip of his wand does not correspond to any known illumination technology, chemical reaction, or subspace phenomenon. When I attempt to analyze its composition, the tricorder returns only the classification, anomalous energy, source undetermined. I have attempted 17 different scanning protocols. All 17 return the same result. Dumbledore's eyebrows rose with what looked like genuine delight. How marvelous. Your device is trying to explain magic as though it were merely another force to be measured. Magic, Data said, turning to face him directly, his head tilting several degrees in the manner Picard had come to recognize as intense curiosity. You are asserting that the light is a product of magic, rather than an undiscovered form of energy generation. I am asserting that it is both, Commander, depending entirely on which of us is doing the asserting. Dumbledore lowered his wand slightly, though the light at its tip did not dim. You'll forgive me if I find your little device fascinating. In 60 years of teaching, I have met scholars from 4 continents and rather fewer galaxies, and none of them have ever tried to put a number on a Lumo's charm. Worf, who had not lowered his phaser, took a half step forward. Captain. We do not know if this is deception. The Romulans have used illusion technology before. I'm aware, Lieutenant. Picard kept his eyes on Dumbledore. But I've also learned that the wisest first move in an unfamiliar situation is rarely a phaser. He held Dumbledore's gaze. You have my word, sir, that my officer means no disrespect. We arrived here through violence not of our choosing, in the middle of an ongoing conflict. We have reason to believe we are not the only ones who fell through that rift. That got Dumbledore's full attention. Others. 2 additional factions, at minimum, Picard said. One that values honor and conquest above negotiation. Another that trades in secrecy and manipulation. Neither is likely to introduce themselves as courteously as I am attempting to. Dumbledore's expression did not change, but something in his posture did, a settling, the look of a man recalculating the shape of a problem that had just grown considerably larger. Then I think, Captain, that you and I have a good deal to discuss, and rather less time to discuss it in than either of us would like. He turned, robes sweeping, and gestured toward the castle. Walk with me. Bring your officers, if you trust them to keep their weapons lowered inside my walls. I would rather begin this conversation over tea than in the mud, and I suspect neither of us wants an audience of 4th years for what comes next. Picard glanced at Worf, who reluctantly holstered his phaser but did not relax the set of his shoulders. Riker fell into step just behind Picard's left shoulder, the position he always took when he wanted to watch his captain's back without seeming to hover. Data walked at Picard's right, tricorder still active, still failing, still delighted by the failure. As they crossed the lawn toward the castle steps, Picard allowed himself one glance back at the sky where the rupture had torn open and then sealed itself, leaving no trace but the memory of gold and violet light. Somewhere out there, a Klingon crew was likely already testing the limits of Hogwarts patience. Somewhere in shadow, a Romulan was already listening at doors that were not meant to be listened at. And ahead of him, climbing steps worn smooth by 1,000 years of footsteps, walked a man who commanded fire from a piece of wood and called it ordinary. Picard had negotiated with gods, with hive minds, with beings who existed outside of time. He had never once negotiated with an institution that ran on nothing he could scan, measure, or predict. He found, despite everything, that he was curious. The tea, when it came, was served in Dumbledore's office beneath the watchful painted eyes of headmasters who had died centuries before Picard's Federation had ever charted a warp lane. He found the portraits unsettling in a way none of his encounters with holographic technology had prepared him for, not because they moved, but because they seemed to be listening, and more than once he caught one of them whispering to a neighbor. They gossip, Dumbledore said, following his gaze with something like amusement. It is, I've found, one of the few habits that survives death reliably intact. Picard set down his cup. Professor, I don't wish to be discourteous, but time may be short. If members of the conflict that brought us here have also arrived on your grounds, they will not wait for tea. No, Dumbledore agreed, I don't imagine they will. Which is why I have already sent word to the Ministry of Magic. I'm afraid, Captain, that whatever quiet arrangement you and I might have preferred to make, this situation has grown too large to remain between these walls. The fireplace across the room answered him before Picard could respond, flaring emerald green with a great rushing sound that made Riker's hand twitch toward his phaser out of pure reflex. A man stepped out of the flames brushing soot from an expensive-looking lime-green bowler hat, followed by 2 witches in matching maroon robes who fanned out to either side of the office with the practiced ease of people used to making an entrance look like a raid. Dumbledore. The man's voice carried the particular brightness of someone determined to project authority he wasn't entirely certain he possessed. I came the moment I received your message. Foreign nationals on Hogwarts grounds, unregistered magical, or is it non-magical, activity, an energy signature the Department of Mysteries has never. His eyes landed on Picard, then swept across Worf's ridged brow with an expression that flickered between alarm and fascination before settling, unhelpfully, on alarm. Merlin's beard. What is that? Cornelius, Dumbledore said, with the patience of a man who had had this exact conversation many times before, may I introduce Captain Picard of the United Federation of Planets. Captain, Cornelius Fudge, Minister for Magic. Minister. Picard rose and inclined his head, the diplomatic instinct of 40 years asserting itself before he'd fully processed the title. I understand your concern. We arrived here through no design of our own, the result of a conflict we did not choose to bring to your world, and we have no intention of remaining longer than necessary. Fudge's eyes had already drifted to the tricorder clipped at Data's hip. That device. Is it magical? It is not, Data said. It is a multispectrum analysis tool utilizing subspace field sensors, though I confess its function in this environment has proven unreliable. I don't understand a word of that, Fudge said, but I'll have it confiscated regardless. Ministry protocol is quite clear on unregistered artifacts of unknown origin, Dumbledore, you know this as well as I do. Minister, Picard said, keeping his voice level, that instrument is Federation property, and it carries no threat to your people. I would ask that you not treat every unfamiliar object as a weapon before you understand what it does. With respect, Captain, I have 400 wizards and witches under my protection in this castle, a foreign object that fell out of the sky trailing enough magical residue to set off every ward Hogwarts owns, and no earthly idea whether you are telling me the truth. Fudge's bowler hat trembled slightly with the force of his own conviction. I would be failing in my duty if I simply took your word for it. It was, Picard reflected, not an unreasonable position, even if the man's manner suggested it was born more of fear than of principle. He had stood in this exact posture himself, demanding proof, distrusting the unfamiliar, weighing an unknown threat against the safety of those he was sworn to protect. The uniform was different. The instinct was not. Then let us find a way to satisfy your duty without stripping us of the means to protect ourselves, Picard said. I will not surrender Starfleet technology into unfamiliar hands, Minister, not out of disrespect, but because that technology, misused or misunderstood, could cause considerably more harm than good. I suspect you would say the same of your wands, were our positions reversed. Something flickered across Fudge's face, not quite agreement, but the recognition of an argument he could not easily dismiss. Beside him, one of the maroon-robed witches leaned in and murmured something Picard couldn't catch. Fudge's expression soured further. There is also the matter, Fudge said, straightening, of the other arrivals your Mr. Data's device apparently detected. Aurors report unusual disturbances near the Forbidden Forest and, more troublingly, near the dungeons. If there are more of you. Not of us, Worf said, speaking for the first time since entering the office, his voice carrying the flat certainty of a warrior stating fact. Klingon do not share allegiance with the Federation merely by circumstance. If a Klingon vessel was pulled through the same rupture, Minister, they will not ask your permission for anything. Fudge paled slightly. And the other disturbance? Picard exchanged a brief glance with Data, who offered the smallest shake of his head, no new readings, nothing confirmed. We believe a third party may also be present. Romulans. If so, I would caution you above all against them, Minister. They do not announce themselves with force. They announce themselves through those they have already convinced to trust them. The office fell quiet. Dumbledore's expression had grown thoughtful, his earlier amusement folding into something more careful. Fudge looked, for the first time since striding out of the fireplace, genuinely frightened. I think, Dumbledore said slowly, that we are going to need rather more tea, Cornelius. And considerably more honesty from everyone in this room than any of us are accustomed to giving. The forest floor was carpeted with wet leaves, and Worf could smell blood in the air before he saw its source. Not fresh, old, half-healed, the particular scent of a wound tended with something other than a dermal regenerator. He moved through the trees with his phaser drawn but lowered, every sense straining against the unfamiliar terrain, until the underbrush ahead broke apart and he found himself staring down the barrel of a disruptor held by a face he recognized with the shock of a blade to the ribs. Korgoth, Worf growled. The Klingon lowered his weapon a fraction, teeth bared in something that was not quite a smile. The traitor of Starfleet. I should have known the rift would spit you out somewhere pathetic. Behind him, two more Klingon emerged from the trees, young, hungry-eyed, the kind of warriors who had spent their whole lives being told that honor was a thing won only through blood. You wear their uniform even here, in a world of sorcerers and children. Have you no shame left, Worf, son of Moke? Worf did not lower his own weapon. I wear it because I chose it, Korgoth. As I would choose it again. Chose weakness. Chose diplomacy over the blade. Korgoth spat onto the leaves between them. This place, this castle of magic tricks and frightened ministry officials, it is beneath a warrior's notice. We should take what we need and leave this backward world to its wand work. You would provoke a war with people who do not understand the rules of honor you claim to live by, Worf said. That is not glory, Korgoth. That is slaughter of the ignorant. Ignorant or not, if they stand between us and returning home, they are obstacles. Nothing more. Korgoth's eyes narrowed. Unless the great Worf has grown too fond of Starfleet's soft philosophies to remember what a Klingon owes his own survival. The confrontation might have gone further. Worf's hand had already tightened on his phaser, old instinct rising alongside older anger, when a new voice cut through the clearing, young and sharp and entirely unafraid. If you're looking for a fight, I'd rather you didn't have it in the Forbidden Forest. There are things in here that'll eat all of you before you finish arguing. A boy stood at the tree line, no older than 14, wand raised but steady, flanked by a girl with wild dark hair whose own wand hand did not waver despite the disruptor pointed in her general direction. Worf recognized him. The same boy who had watched from the castle tower, the scar visible even in the dim forest light. Korgoth's warriors laughed, delighted by what looked to them like children playing at soldiers. This world sends its whelps to fight its battles. I'm not fighting, the boy said. I'm asking you not to. There's a difference, and if you don't understand it, that's your problem, not mine. Worf found himself studying the boy with something unexpected. Not the dismissal Korgoth wore so openly, but a flicker of recognition. There was no fear in the boy's stance, only a controlled readiness Worf associated with cadets who had faced real danger before their training had finished catching up to their courage. Whatever this castle was, whatever a forbidden forest implied about the dangers it contained, this boy had clearly walked through worse than 3 armed Klingon and lived to tell of it. You have courage, Worf said, before Korgoth could escalate further. What is your name? Harry Potter. Harry Potter. Worf turned back to Korgoth, positioning himself between the boy and the Klingon weapons without appearing to do so deliberately. This one has no fear of you, Korgoth, though he is young and unarmed by our standards. Among my people, that alone would earn him a hearing at council, not a blade. Among your people, Korgoth sneered, perhaps. I do not answer to the Federation's council, Worf, and I certainly do not answer to a child waving a stick. Then answer to this, Worf said, and the shift in his voice was subtle but absolute, the tone he used only when a threat had become a decision. If you draw Klingon blood in this forest today, you begin a war on 2 fronts you cannot win. The wizards will not fight with honor as we understand it. They will fight with tricks, poison, and numbers, and they will not stop until every one of you is dead or driven from this world entirely. Is that the glory you came here seeking? Korgoth's jaw worked, some old calculation passing behind his eyes, not fear, exactly, but the grudging respect of one warrior recognizing tactical truth in another's words. You have not lost your instincts entirely, then. I have not lost what makes me Klingon, Worf said. I have only added to it what makes me more. The standoff held a moment longer, disruptors and phaser and 2 trembling wands all suspended in the cold forest air, before Korgoth finally lowered his weapon with visible reluctance. We will not attack the child's world today, he said. But do not mistake this for peace, Worf. We are here because we were thrown here, not because we wish to be your allies. I would not presume otherwise, Worf said. As the Klingon withdrew into the trees, Harry Potter lowered his wand slowly, watching Worf with open curiosity. You knew him. We serve on opposing sides of a very old argument, Worf said. About what honor means. About what a warrior owes to strength, and what he owes to those weaker than himself. He studied the boy a moment longer. You showed courage tonight, Harry Potter, standing against armed strangers to prevent a slaughter you did not understand. That is a rare thing, in any world. Harry's mouth twisted into something almost like a smile, though his eyes stayed watchful. You get used to it. Strange things falling out of the sky, I mean. This isn't even the weirdest thing that's happened this year. Worf found, to his own surprise, that he believed him completely. The dungeons of Hogwarts held a particular quality of cold that no environmental control system could have replicated, not the sterile chill of a starship's lower decks, but something older, damper, layered with centuries of stone that had never known the touch of climate regulation. Sub-Commander Tallis found it almost restful. Cold clarified the mind. Her handlers in the Tal Shir had taught her that discomfort, properly managed, was simply another tool. She had been observing for 3 hours before she made contact, watching the comings and goings of the castle's occupants from the shadow of an unused storeroom, cataloging patterns the way she had been trained to catalog anything, who held power, who resented it, who among the students moved through these halls with the particular hunger of someone who believed themselves owed more than they had been given. The boy she selected answered that description precisely. He came alone, as she had known he would from 2 hours of watching his habits, a pale, sharp-featured student whose green-trimmed robes marked him as a member of whichever house here valued ambition, and whose expression, even walking an empty corridor, carried the coiled resentment of someone convinced the world had not yet recognized his worth. Tallis stepped from the shadow at precisely the moment he passed, close enough to speak without shouting, far enough that he could not simply reach out and strike her. Draco Malfoy, she said, and watched him startle, then recover with the practiced sneer of a boy taught young that fear must never be shown. Your father is a man of some influence with your ministry, I understand. And you, forgive me, I have been watching rather longer than is polite. You are a young man who believes his own influence has not yet caught up to his talents. Who are you? His wand was out, though his hand trembled slightly with either cold or nerves. You're one of them. One of the ones that fell out of the sky. I am someone who has watched empires rise on exactly the resentment I see in your face right now, Tallis said, letting the word settle before continuing. I do not require your trust, Mr. Malfoy. I require only your ambition, which I suspect you have in considerable supply and rather less outlet for than you would like. Draco's sneer faltered, just slightly, replaced by something more calculating. What do you want? Information, to begin with. Your world's politics, its power structures, who truly commands the ministry's fear and who merely occupies its offices. In exchange, she let the pause stretch, watching him lean toward it despite himself, I offer you a glimpse of technology your ministry does not understand and cannot regulate. Power that answers to no wand, Mr. Malfoy. Power your father's rivals will never see coming, because they will not know to look for it. You're lying. But his voice lacked conviction, and his eyes had already drifted to the small device she allowed to glint at her belt, a disruptor, deliberately displayed, deliberately unexplained. I rarely lie, Mr. Malfoy. I simply reveal information selectively, according to what serves the moment. Tallis allowed herself the smallest, coldest smile. The Federation officers who arrived with me believe in transparency, in diplomacy, in surrendering advantage for the comfort of being seen as virtuous. I do not share that weakness. I believe that those who deserve power should be given the means to claim it, without apology. Draco's jaw tightened, some old wound flickering behind his eyes, a father's disappointment, perhaps, or a name that had once commanded fear and now drew only whispers. My father says the old families should be running things. Not mudbloods and half-breeds pretending they belong at Hogwarts. Tallis filed the word away without reaction, though she registered its function precisely, a fault line already. Present in this world, waiting only for the right pressure to widen. Then perhaps, she said carefully, we have more in common than you realize. I do not care what your world calls its hierarchies, Mr. Malfoy. I care only that hierarchies exist, and that those clever enough to recognize opportunity are the ones who should benefit from them. What exactly are you offering? Nothing yet. Only the promise that I am listening, and that unlike your ministry, unlike your headmaster, unlike the Federation captain currently drinking tea in Dumbledore's office pretending his ideals apply to every world he stumbles into, I do not judge ambition. I cultivate it. She stepped back into the shadow of the storeroom, already fading from the dim torchlight. Think on what I've said. I will find you again when you've decided whether loyalty to a losing cause is worth more to you than the chance to matter. She left him standing alone in the corridor, wand still raised at empty air, his expression caught between suspicion and the particular hunger of a boy who had spent his whole life being told he was destined for greatness and had begun, quietly, to fear it wasn't true. Tallis moved deeper into the dungeons, already recalculating. The boy was promising. Not yet an asset, but a thread worth pulling, one among several she intended to test before the week was through. She had catalogued at least 3 other candidates during her hours of observation, a professor whose potion stores suggested resources the ministry didn't fully track, a prefect whose ambitions outpaced his house's reputation, a groundskeeper whose simple loyalty made him either useless or, properly approached, unexpectedly valuable. Empires were not built through force alone. The Federation understood diplomacy. The Klingon understood conquest. But the Romulan Star Empire understood something neither of them had ever fully mastered, that the most durable power was the kind others volunteered to give you. Believing all the while that the choice had been entirely their own. Somewhere above her, in a warmly lit office full of tea and careful words, Captain Picard was no doubt negotiating in good faith, trusting that goodwill might be met with goodwill in turn. Tallis found that, more than anything else about this strange castle, almost charming. By the 3rd day, Picard had come to understand 3 things about Hogwarts that no tricorder could have told him. The first was that the castle's defenses were formidable in ways that defied every principle of Federation shield technology, wards layered over centuries, responsive not to energy signatures but to intent, a form of security that seemed to think, in its own strange way, about who it allowed to pass. The second was that Cornelius Fudge's fear, however poorly channeled, was not baseless. Something was moving in the wider wizarding world, a gathering darkness the ministry seemed determined to deny even as its evidence accumulated. The third, and the one that troubled him most, was that Albus Dumbledore already knew far more about that darkness than he was saying, and was watching Picard with the careful patience of a man deciding how much to reveal. "You've been quiet, Captain," Dumbledore said, over their now customary evening tea. "I find that more unsettling than your questions." "I've been considering a problem," Picard admitted. "One that predates my arrival on your grounds by rather longer than you might expect. The Prime Directive." Dumbledore said it carefully, testing the unfamiliar phrase, though his eyes suggested he had already guessed its shape from 3 days of careful conversation. Commander Riker mentioned it, in passing. Non-interference, I believe, was the general principle. Non-interference with the natural development of a society, Picard said. We do not impose our technology, our politics, our values on civilizations unprepared for them. It is not merely policy, Professor. It is the foundation of everything the Federation claims to stand for, the belief that other peoples have the right to determine their own future without our thumb on the scale. And you find that principle complicated. Here. I find it nearly impossible here, Picard admitted, the words costing him something to say aloud. You have told me, in careful pieces, of a man who once terrorized this world and may be gathering strength to do so again. You have told me of prejudice woven into the structure of your society, of children marked from birth by bloodlines they did not choose. And I have watched Fudge, your minister, deny evidence of a growing threat because acknowledging it would cost him something politically. He set down his cup. Every instinct I have, forged over decades of service, tells me to help you see it clearly. And every principle I have sworn to uphold tells me that is not my place. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. May I ask you something in return, Captain? If you saw a child drowning, would you consult a directive before pulling them from the water? That's not a fair comparison, Professor. Isn't it? You speak of non-interference as though it were a wall with no doors. But surely even your Federation recognizes some difference between reshaping a civilization's destiny and simply choosing not to stand by while harm is done in front of you. Picard felt the weight of the question settle somewhere he hadn't expected. There is a difference. But the line between the two is rarely as clear as either of us would like, and history is full of officers who convinced themselves they were the exception, only to leave a wound behind that outlasted whatever good they believed they were doing. And yet you helped Cornelius understand the danger your Klingon associates represented. You have already, by your own admission, interfered. Dumbledore's eyes were sharp now, not unkind, but unwilling to let the point slide. I wonder, Captain, whether the Prime Directive was written for civilizations you have not yet been forced to live among. It is one thing to observe a world from orbit. It is quite another to sit at its table, drink its tea, and watch its children walk past you in corridors, and tell yourself their fate is none of your concern. Picard had no immediate answer, and the absence of one troubled him more than any argument Dumbledore might have made instead. He thought of Voldemort, a name spoken in this castle with a fear so deep it had warped grown wizards into refusing to say it aloud, and of the Ministry's willful blindness, and of a boy in the forest who Worf had described with something close to admiration, a 14-year-old already carrying burdens no child should have to bear. What would you have me do, Professor? He asked finally. Take up arms in a war that is not mine to fight. Impose Federation judgment on a society I understand only in fragments. No, Dumbledore said. I would have you do what I suspect you already know how to do, better than most beings I have ever met. Bear witness honestly. Offer counsel when it is asked for. And decide, when the moment comes, because I believe it will come, Captain, sooner than either of us would like. Whether standing aside is itself a choice, and whether you can live with what that choice costs. Picard sat with the words a long while after Dumbledore had gone, the fire in the office guttering low, the portraits around him murmuring in their sleep. He thought of the Prime Directive not as the ironclad wall he had always understood it to be, but as something more fragile. A principle built by people who had never faced a war already halfway won by the side that pretended it wasn't happening at all. He did not yet know what he would do when that moment arrived. But he understood, with a clarity that unsettled him more than any anomaly Data's tricorder had failed to explain, that it was coming, and that neutrality itself was a decision with consequences he would have to answer for, whichever choice he made. Data had spent 3 days attempting to reconcile two systems of matter transference that, by every principle he understood, should not have been able to coexist in the same physical space, and on the 4th day, he made the mistake of testing his theory in practice. It began, as many of his discoveries did, with a question that would not leave him alone. If apparition disassembled and reassembled a wizard's body across distance through a mechanism the wands of this world called magic, and Federation transporters achieved a similar result through matter-energy conversion and quantum resolution reassembly, then some underlying principle must connect the two, however differently their practitioners understood the process. He had proposed this to Professor Flitwick, the small, sharp-eyed charms instructor who had proven more receptive to Data's questions than any other faculty member, and together they had constructed what both of them, in retrospect, would agree was a reckless experiment. The theory was simple enough. If Data could calibrate a handheld transport beacon, salvaged from the wreckage that had scattered across the grounds, to synchronize its matter stream frequency with the resonant signature of an apparition point, he might be able to demonstrate that the two forms of travel were, at some fundamental level, expressions of the same underlying phenomenon. It would be, he had told Flitwick with something approaching enthusiasm, a discovery worthy of publication in 17 different scientific disciplines across two civilizations that had never known the other existed. He had not accounted for Neville Longbottom walking through the courtyard at exactly the wrong moment. The boy, awkward, well-meaning, chronically unlucky in ways that Data found statistically improbable even accounting for ordinary variance, had been crossing the courtyard toward the greenhouses when the beacon activated. Data would later reconstruct, with painstaking precision, exactly what went wrong. The transport field, calibrated to synchronize with apparition's magical signature, had instead created a resonance cascade, catching Neville in a field that was neither fully magical disassembly nor fully Federation matter transport, but some unstable combination of both. The boy screamed, a sound that would haunt Data's memory banks with unusual persistence. As his body began to flicker between solid and translucent, caught in a stutter between two forms of travel that refused to agree on which laws of physics should govern him. Professor Flitwick. Data's voice, though he did not raise it, carried the particular urgency he reserved for genuine crises. The resonance is destabilizing. I require immediate assistance. Flitwick's wand was already moving, a complex series of gestures accompanied by words Data's tricorder could not translate into any recognizable linguistic structure, and for one terrible moment nothing happened at all. Neville still flickering, still caught, his face contorted in a pain that was somehow both physical and something stranger, something closer to a body being asked to exist in two states simultaneously. Data made a decision in 0. For seconds that he would later describe, in his log, as the most significant calculated risk of his 3 days at Hogwarts. He reached into the beacon's failing systems and reversed the transport stream polarity entirely, gambling that a Federation transporter's failsafe, designed to abort a transport rather than complete a corrupted pattern, might override whatever magical instability had taken hold. The beacon shrieked with a sound like tearing metal. Neville's body snapped fully solid, and he collapsed onto the courtyard stones, gasping, whole, alive. Madame Pomfrey arrived at a dead run, wand already glowing with diagnostic charms, and it was several tense minutes, Data standing motionless, recalculating the experiments. Failure points with what might, in a human, have been called anguish, before she pronounced Neville shaken, bruised, but fundamentally unharmed. You could have killed him, Flitwick said afterward, in the privacy of his office, his usually cheerful voice gone flat with something Data recognized as barely restrained fury. Do you understand that, Commander Data? Not injured. Killed. Torn apart between two forces neither of us fully understands. I am aware, Professor. I calculated the probability of catastrophic failure at 0.03% prior to the experiment. I did not anticipate an unauthorized subject entering the affected radius, nor did I fully account for the instability introduced by combining an incomplete understanding of magical resonance with Federation transport calibration. Data's tone remained level, but something in the phrasing, the precision, the repetition of the word anticipate, suggested a discomfort he could not name as guilt but which functioned, in every practical sense, exactly like it. I was wrong to proceed without more thorough safeguards. I take full responsibility. Responsibility doesn't put Mr. Longbottom back together if the beacon had failed the other way, Flitwick said, though some of the anger had already begun to drain from his voice, replaced by something more tired. You people, Federation, Klingon, whatever the third lot call themselves. You keep treating this castle as a laboratory. It is a school, Commander. These are children. I understand the distinction, Professor. I did not, prior to today, fully understand its weight. Data paused, processing something that felt, in its structure, uncomfortably close to shame. I would like to apologize to Mr. Longbottom directly, if he is willing to receive it. Neville, when Data found him later in the hospital wing, blanket pulled up to his chin, managed a shaky laugh that surprised them both. It's fine. Sort of. I mean, it wasn't fine, obviously, but you're not exactly the first thing at this school that's tried to turn me inside out. There was a boggart once, and a devil's snare, and, he stopped, considering. It's a weird year. This isn't even in the top 5. Data filed that statement away with the same careful attention he gave every piece of data at Hogwarts. Another indication that this world's tolerance for the impossible ran considerably deeper than Federation records could have prepared him for, and a reminder, delivered gently by a bruised 14-year-old, that competence without caution was its own kind of failure. Draco Malfoy found the note tucked inside his potions textbook 3 days after the incident with Longbottom, written in handwriting too precise to be anything but deliberate, instructions folded into words that gave away nothing to anyone who might intercept them. He read it twice before burning it in his dormitory fireplace, his pulse loud in his own ears. He did not tell his father. Not yet. He told himself that was strategy, not fear. The meeting took place in the same dungeon corridor, at the same hour, and this time Talus did not waste time on pleasantries. "You've had a week to consider my offer, Mr. Malfoy. I trust you've reached a decision, or I've misjudged your ambition entirely. I want to know what you actually get out of this," Draco said, with more steel in his voice than he'd managed the first time. "You're not doing this out of kindness. Nobody offers something for nothing." "Good," Talus said, and something in her tone suggested genuine approval. "That instinct will serve you better than your father's has served him. I want information. Leverage. A foothold in a world my own faction does not yet understand well enough to exploit properly. In exchange, I offer you access to technology that answers to no wand and obeys no ministry regulation. A resource your father's rivals could never anticipate, because it does not exist within any framework they know to guard against." What she did not say, because it served no purpose to say it aloud, was that her true masters back in Romulan space cared nothing for this castle, this war, or this boy's ambitions. She cared only that a working transporter beacon, even a damaged one, even one cannibalized from wreckage, represented technology that, properly understood, could be weaponized in ways this world's ministry would never see coming until it was too late to stop. Draco's eyes had drifted, as she'd known they would, to the small disruptor at her hip. "Show me something. Anything. I'm not risking my family's name on promises." Talus considered him a moment longer, then drew the weapon slowly, deliberately, angling it away from him toward an empty alcove in the dungeon wall. The disruptor's whine was quiet, almost gentle, before the beam struck stone and left a smoking, perfectly circular hole where solid rock had been an instant before. Draco stared at the destruction, and something in his expression shifted from calculation to something closer to hunger. That's not a wand. That's not anything I've ever seen." "No," Talus agreed. "And that is precisely why it frightens no one in this castle enough to guard against it properly. Your aurors watch for curses, Mr. Malfoy. They do not watch for this." She holstered the weapon. "Bring me something useful, the layout of your ministry's security measures, the names of those in your father's circle who might be persuaded toward flexible loyalties, and I will bring you something in return. Not the weapon itself, not yet. But knowledge of how it works. Knowledge your father's entire generation would kill for." It was, elsewhere in the castle that same evening, a very different kind of temptation being weighed. Word had reached beyond Hogwarts walls faster than Dumbledore had hoped, whispers carried by owls, by frightened parents, by the particular efficiency with which bad news always traveled faster than good. And in a manor house some distance from the school, a circle of robed figures had gathered around a report that interested them considerably more than the ministry's official denials. "Weapons that need no incantation," one voice murmured, low and pleased, in a room lit only by candlelight and the cold green light of old, familiar magic. "Devices that cut through flesh and stone without a single word of power spoken. Imagine, if such things could be understood. Reproduced. Turned toward purposes rather grander than a schoolboy's petty ambitions." "The boy has already made contact," another voice reported. "The Malfoy heir. He believes himself clever enough to play both sides." "Let him believe it," the first voice said, and there was something in its tone, patient, ancient, endlessly calculating, that would have chilled Picard to the bone had he been present to hear it. "Children make useful doors. It matters little who opens them, so long as what waits on the other side finally has a way through. Elsewhere, in a tower office lit by candlelight of a very different kind, Dumbledore set down a letter that had just arrived by owl, his expression graver than it had been in the 3 days since Picard's arrival. He had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that the stranger's presence might remain contained, a curiosity, a diplomatic puzzle, a problem to be managed quietly while the wider war gathering beyond Hogwarts walls continued on its own separate, terrible timeline. That hope, he now understood, had been naive. "Minerva," he said, and something in his voice made her look up sharply from the parchment she'd been grading, "I believe it is time we told our guests rather more than we have. Voldemort's people are already aware of what fell into our grounds. And I fear they intend to acquire it, whatever the cost." Outside, beyond the castle's ancient wards, the same sky that had torn open to deposit 3 warring factions onto Hogwarts' lawn stretched dark and indifferent above them all, keeping whatever secrets remained about how many more threads of that distant war might yet come tumbling through. The attack came at night, as Picard had known, somewhere in the part of him that had learned to expect the worst timing for the worst news, that it would. Dumbledore's warning had come only hours before. Voldemort's followers, aware now of the technology scattered across Hogwarts grounds, moving to claim it before the Ministry could organize any meaningful defense. Picard had convened what few allies circumstance had given him. Riker and Worf at his sides, Data already recalibrating what remained of the wreckage into something resembling a coordinated defense, Dumbledore and a hastily assembled group of professors and order members forming a second line behind the castle's ancient wards. They came across the Black Lake first. A dozen figures in black robes and white masks, moving with the eerie, silent coordination of soldiers who had trained together for years, curses lighting the darkness in flashes of green and red that Data's tricorder still refused to properly classify even now, 3 days into trying. "Positions," Picard said, and felt the old, familiar clarity of command settle over him even in a battlefield that obeyed none of the physics he understood. "Mr. Worf, hold the eastern approach. Commander Riker, with me." What he had not anticipated, what none of them had fully anticipated, was the Klingon. Korgatha's crew emerged from the tree line at the battle's opening minutes, disruptors already drawn, and for one terrible instant Picard believed they had come to join the attack, to claim whatever prize the chaos might yield for themselves. Instead, Korgatha's voice cut across the field, rough and furious. "You said this world's darkness would not touch us," he snarled at Worf, disruptor already firing at a masked figure who'd turned a curse toward a cluster of terrified younger students Dumbledore's people hadn't managed to evacuate in time. "You did not tell me it hunted children. I did not know the scope of it myself." Worf shot back, firing his own phaser in support. "Does it matter now, Korgath?" "No," Korgath said, baring his teeth in something that was almost a smile, almost genuine joy at finally having an enemy worth the name. "Tonight, it does not matter at all. Whatever grievances existed between Starfleet and the Klingon Empire, whatever old wars had scarred both their histories, they found themselves, in that chaotic hour, fighting the same battle from opposite ends of the field. Federation phasers and Klingon disruptors cutting alongside curses and hexes, a coalition born not of alliance but of shared, immediate necessity. It was Data who spotted the true danger first, not the massed attackers on the ground, but a second group moving with purpose toward the wreckage site itself, where the damaged transporter components lay half buried in mud, exactly where Talus had promised Draco Malfoy they would be found. "Captain," Data called, "the primary transport core is unguarded. If Voldemort's forces reach it before we do, they may attempt to extract or replicate the technology." Picard's jaw tightened. "Then we do not let them reach it." He moved through the chaos with Riker at his back, phaser fire cutting brief arcs of light through curse flash and shadow, and found Draco Malfoy already there. Not fighting, not fleeing, but standing frozen at the wreckage site's edge, caught between the promise Talus had made him and the sudden, undeniable reality of a battle he had never truly believed would touch him personally. "Move away from the core," Picard said, weapon raised but not yet aimed at the boy. Draco's voice cracked, the careful bravado of the past week collapsing entirely under the weight of masked figures advancing through smoke and screaming children somewhere behind them. "I didn't think it would be like this." She said it would just be information, just. "Whatever she promised you," Picard said, "I suspect she never intended to deliver it honestly." Romulans rarely do. He kept his voice level, recognizing in the boy's face something he had seen 100 times in 100 different uniforms, a young person who had gambled on power and found only its cost instead. "Move. Now. Before that choice is made for you." Draco moved. The battle's turning point came not from Federation phasers or Klingon disruptors, but from an unexpected quarter entirely. Harry Potter, alongside a small cluster of older students who had refused Professor McGonagall's order to retreat, cutting off Voldemort's forces approached to the castle's main doors with a combination of spellwork that Data, watching from a distance, would later describe as inefficient by Federation combat standards, but remarkably effective given the constraints of the medium. Worf found himself, in the battle's final chaotic minutes, fighting shoulder to shoulder with Korgoth against 3 masked attackers who had cornered a group of first-years near the greenhouse, and in that moment, disruptor and phaser fire interlocking with brutal efficiency, something passed between the two Klingon that neither would have called friendship, but which was, perhaps, its own kind of respect. By the time the attackers finally withdrew, vanishing into the dark with the same eerie coordination with which they'd arrived, leaving behind smoking craters and the acrid smell of curse fire, the grounds of Hogwarts bore scars that would take considerably longer than a single night to heal. Picard stood amid the wreckage, phaser still in hand, and found Dumbledore beside him, his robes singed, his expression graver than Picard had yet seen it. "They did not get what they came for," Dumbledore said quietly. "No," Picard agreed. "But they know now that it exists. And I fear, Professor, that tonight was only ever meant to test our defenses, not defeat them." Somewhere beyond the tree-line, in the deep dark where Talis had already begun calculating her own next move. That assessment would have earned Picard rather more credit than she would ever admit to him directly. The morning after the battle, Hogwarts gathered its wounded, counted its damage, and began the slow work of deciding what came next, a process that Picard found, despite everything, achingly familiar. He had presided over such mornings before, on other worlds, after other conflicts. The particular quality of silence that settled over survivors was, it seemed, a universal constant. Dumbledore convened them in his office one final time. Picard, Riker, Worf, Data, Fudge looking considerably less bureaucratic and considerably more shaken than he had a week before, and, at Dumbledore's quiet insistence, Harry Potter, whose account of the forest confrontation with Korgotha's warriors had proven more useful to the Knight's defense than anyone had initially credited. "The rift that brought you here," Dumbledore said, "has been studied by our Department of Mysteries for the better part of a week. I am told it has stabilized considerably since your arrival, and that it may, with the right combination of magical and technological understanding, be reopened long enough to send you home." Picard felt something settle in his chest, relief, certainly, but tangled with something more complicated. "And the Klingon? The Romulan operative? Korgotha's crew has expressed reluctant willingness to return through the same passage, provided he need not travel alongside Starfleet officers he still considers beneath his notice," Dumbledore said, with the ghost of dry humor. "As for the Romulan, I'm afraid Subcommander Talis appears to have vanished sometime during last night's chaos. Whether she intends to return home or continue her work here, undetected, I cannot say with certainty." "Then this world remains at risk," Worf said. "It does," Dumbledore agreed. "As it was before you arrived, and as it will remain after you leave. Some wars, Lieutenant, do not end because outside forces wish them to. They end when those who live inside them find the will to finish them." He looked to Harry, whose expression had grown solemn beyond his years. "I suspect that reckoning is still some distance away. But I do not believe your presence here was without purpose, whatever chaos it also brought." Draco Malfoy was never punished publicly for his contact with Talis, Dumbledore judged, quietly, that the boy's fear that night had taught him more than any formal consequence could, but something in him had shifted, subtly, in ways even he did not yet fully understand. When the rift reopened 3 days later, Picard stood at its threshold and looked back at the castle one final time. "Professor," he said, "I came to this world with a principle I believed unbreakable, and you have taught me it was never quite as simple as I understood it. Principles rarely survive contact with real people, Captain," Dumbledore said. "That is not their failure. It is what makes them worth having at all." The light took them, gold and violet, and Hogwarts settled back into its ancient quiet, wiser, warier, and irrevocably changed by the war that had crossed dimensions to remind it that no world, however guarded by magic, stands entirely alone against the dark. Somewhere in the shadows, unseen, Talos remained. Live long and prosper. More stories await.